How's everybody doing? Before getting into the content, I wanted to give a quick shout out to DraftBuff for sponsoring this video. If this is your first time hearing about them, DraftBuff is a place where you can play in fantasy leagues for esports. You can play on their mobile app or use their website, it's up to you. They have leagues for Overwatch and 4 other games in which you can participate in one of 2 game modes. First is the typical fantasy league. In Overwatch, you draft a team with anywhere from 4 to 10 players and you go round by round selecting your DPS, tank, and support players who you believe are going to earn you a lot of points every single week in head-to-head matchups with other people in your league. You can also make trades and drop players for new ones if you aren't satisfied with your team at any point throughout the entire season. It's a fun season-long event that you can play with other people in the community or your friends. Alright, but what if you're somebody who doesn't like committing to one particular team? Well, I have the perfect solution for you. DraftBuff also offers Draft Royale leagues. In this game mode, you get to pick a new team every single week and nobody is off limits for you to pick. The only catch is that there is a salary cap that you cannot exceed. Each player and team is worth a different amount, so you have to be strategic about who you pick. It's a fun way to show off your knowledge and prediction skills since there is a leaderboard which keeps track of who is earning the most points every single week. I'm actually running a verified Draft Royale league with community members throughout the entire season, which you can join through the link in the description. If you're looking to play fantasy but you don't have one to join, consider joining my league. I'll be playing in it as well, so you can show me how much smarter you are than me while having fun with the rest of the community. Rosters for Week 1 lock on opening day, April 16th, so join and make your team before it's too late, and consider joining DraftBuff today through their website or their mobile app. Thanks again to DraftBuff for sponsoring this video, and now on to your regularly scheduled programming. As many of you may recall, I recently made a prediction video for the upcoming season where I put in answers for all sorts of different questions. Also in that video was a survey I linked to all of you to get your input on the same questions. To continue with tradition, we are once again doing a community prediction video. We have a pretty good sample size to work with and a lot of interesting results. Today's video is all about you and some of the interesting predictions that you made. Oh, and if you did not participate in the survey, feel free to leave your own predictions to these questions down in the comments section. So here are the predictions made by many of you in this wonderful community. Starting with question number 1. I wanted to know who you thought was going to win the Eastern and Western conferences, and the results did not stray far off from expectations. The common consensus was that the Dragons are the frontrunners to win Asia, and the Shock are the frontrunners to win North America. The Dragons received about 73% of the votes, while the Shock were just about at 67%. The obvious trend to point out here is that people have a bit more faith in the Dragons to win their region, which is pretty understandable, I would say. The Shock have a few potential threats on their hands. There's quite a few NA teams who could be tough to deal with under the right circumstances, and most would agree that Shanghai likely only have a couple of teams at a time to worry about. There's more teams they're going to steamroll, it feels like, and I'm sure the Shock never winning their conference before also might play a factor into this. I'm guessing some people believe that trend is going to continue, and that's fair enough. These weird trends happen with teams all the time, but regardless, Shanghai and the Shock seem to be the crowd favorites for this particular question. Question 2. Who will make the Final Four of the playoffs? The 4 most popular answers were the Shock, Dragons, Justice, and Gladiators. All 4 of these teams, they have pretty strong rosters on paper and have high expectations. The Shock and Dragons, they were the favorites in the previous question, so no surprise to see them here as well. It's also pretty hard to go against the Justice simply due to the hype factor with their DPS and tanks. Their ceiling is incredibly high, and if they put it all together the way fans envision it in their heads, they're going to be a threat to basically everybody around them. It's interesting to see them tie with the Gladiators though. Given the doubts behind the support line for many of the critics out there, I guess it makes sense. Speaking of the Gladiators, their 48.3% turnout is pretty impressive. But I mean, hey, with that ridiculous support and DPS line, who could blame you? The team has so much potential. It would seem that many of you have a lot of faith in the tank line to hold their own as well, and I'm guessing that the coaching isn't much of a concern for a bunch of you either. The crazy amount of talent they're working with will be enough. That's what I gather from this answer. But let's take a look at a few of the other popular answers, shall we? How about the Philly Fusion netting about 35% of the votes? Even after everything that has happened, there's still a lot of believers out there. They have a ton of superstar level players on this roster, so I can't really blame you. I would say they have one at pretty much every position besides off-tank. Philly are a bit more of a gamble this year considering the coaching and personnel changes, but there still is a lot of promise. And let's not forget that a bunch of those guys are hungry to win. Two other teams to get a noticeable number of votes are the Dynasty and the Fuel. There's a lot of believers for both of these franchises, and I mean, that's kind of a given at this point given their massive fan bases, but it's not just the fans, I would say. A lot of people out there just feel really good about Seoul because they're coming off a grand finals appearance alongside an upgraded off-tank. As for Dallas, their roster just feels pretty on paper. There's a lot of big name players. Their combined potential could lead to some pretty promising results if everything clicks. Oh, and one other thing before moving on, shout out to the NYXL and Chengdu believers. I see you guys with your 40 votes a pop. Mad respect for going all in. You're going to look really smart if you somehow get that right because there's not a lot of people out there who share the same level of faith as you do. Moving on to question 3, I wanted to know who you think will win the grand finals. And hey, would you look at that? More shock and Shanghai supremacy. I gotta say, I'm a little surprised though. The top 2 picks are to be expected, but the shock getting under 50% of the votes is very interesting. I'm gonna go on a whim here and say that it's for one of 3 reasons that people aren't picking them. Reason number 1, you think the shock are more vulnerable this year due to some potential downgrades to their roster. Reason 2, you're sick and tired of the shock winning and are just hoping someone else wins. Or 3, you just have a gut feeling. Or maybe a combination of the 3. That's the general reading I'm getting after reading some of the comments though. Let me know if there's any other reasons why you think the shock might come up short this year down in the comments. But anyway, that does not change the fact that a majority of you are still expecting the shock to win. They want this three-peat so badly, and it just feels like they always find a way to be one step ahead of everybody else. It's been this way for well over a year. They have the superior coaching, experience, and knowledge. Every time we think other teams have caught up, they just blow everybody out of the water. The Dragons are in a similar situation, just without the championship experience. They have grown accustomed to dominating and winning games in the clutch. They really do feel like one of the best options out there to topple the shock. They're not perfect, but they match up with them pretty well. I thought they might receive a bit more votes than they did, but 26% is still pretty good. For those of you wondering about some of the other results, the Justice got almost 10%. That's pretty good when you consider the doubts that fans have about their support line. It would seem that their potential has shined through a lot of the individual concerns, which is pretty cool. I'm glad to see people have confidence in this newly formed roster. Oh, and the other blue one with 8% on the chart is for the Gladiators, if you're wondering. There's a correlation between this question and the Final Four, which makes sense given that this is the projected Final Four for a lot of you, and rounding out the top 5 is the Fusion. Again, this was another team that was pretty popular in the Final Four question. To my Philly believers out there, I tip my hat to you. The fact that you can remain confident even after all of this time is incredible. And yet again, trailing behind the Fusion would be the Dynasty and the Fuel with 13 and 12 votes respectively. Everything seems to be connecting together real nicely. Alrighty, next up was the MVP predictions, and apologies in advance here because Google Forms actually does not give out charts for open-ended questions. Also, there were separate results for certain players due to differences in spelling and everything, so I kind of just had to count this and a few other questions by hand. As a result, we have some scuffed notepad screenshots. Hooray! Anyway, let's get down to business. Here are all of the players who received 10 or more votes. At number 1 by a clear margin is Decay. It makes so much sense. Unless the Justice totally flop, you seriously do have to like his chances after how great he was in Season 3 despite not always being in the best situation on Dallas. With better resources now behind him, he could dominate even harder. He's so insanely good at DPS and even Zarya, and he's progressed a lot since Season 2. He'll be unstoppable if he keeps this trend going. Also getting a significant number of votes was Violet. After the season he had in 2020, it would not be a surprise in the slightest to me if he takes it home. Remember how insane he was from like the May Melee and onward? If he can be the clear-cut top flex support for an entire season, then he could totally take this thing home. If his predecessor Jonek won it back in the day, then there's reason to believe he could do it as well. Coming in third place was Striker actually, which is another good one I would say. The Shock DPS rotation has kind of shifted. With no more Rascal or Aunts, Striker could very well be the true number 1 option at almost all times. There's that, and the fact that he's been a staple in the league since the very beginning. Anytime he gets significant playtime, he's a bright spot. He makes his presence felt. He's a freak. If he gets to play pretty much all the time like he did in Season 1, then he very well could find himself on the ballot again. And how about at number 4, Alarm? That's another good one. This guy was truly comparable to Violet, probably the only guy for that matter, and he was right there with him the whole year, and he's arguably more well-rounded than Violet thanks to his clearly better Ana. If Philly continue to be successful and he plays even just a little bit better, or at least at the same level as last year, then his odds are pretty good. The people love flashy support play, and that makes him and Violet great potential picks. How about at 5th place? We have a tie between Carpe and Glister, receiving 22 votes apiece. Carpe is basically in the same situation as Striker. When he's in the game, he's a staple. He pops off on a regular basis and is insanely good in the clutch. That is something that a lot of people value, which gives Carpe great odds of making the ballot. He's already done it twice, so what's stopping him from doing it again? Glister's a bit more interesting. It's something I've heard a lot of. The theory is that Glister becomes a god on the Shock and plays at Aunt's levels good. And I mean, hey, it's hard to doubt the Shock given their reputation and the sheer number of fantastic players they have produced throughout the years. And what's good about Glister is that he's not raw. He's always been insanely talented, and he already has Overwatch League level experience, and to top it all off, he's already proven himself against elite hit-scan players despite playing for a trashy team. Looking at a few of the other popular votes, we've got Void, who's pretty self-explanatory, you got Prophet, Birdring, Choi, Shu, lots of staples, but there were a few eye-catchers. I, for one, was not expecting such a high turnout from Kevster. Don't get me wrong, this guy is talented, and there's nowhere to go but up, but to have him above Birdring and other flex DPS players is intriguing. He'll surely be a fantastic player, but MVP level? We'll have to see about that one. Also, how about the number of votes for Super and Smurf? Main Tank usually does not get this level of respect with this kind of award. Based on what I saw though, a lot of you genuinely do believe Smurf has a shot, and honestly, I hope you're right because he's a beast and he deserves that level of recognition. I can't really say the same for Super though, not that I don't love the guy to death, but it feels like most people either gave this to him for the memes or because of his popularity. The results for this question though, really good stuff. Good job guys. Next up, we've got Rookie of the Year, which is pretty one-sided. Whether you know contenders like the back of your hand or you don't watch it at all, everybody is on the Mag hype train. With a grand total of 200 votes, he by far leads the rest of the pack. He just feels so pro-ready. He's got great experience, high levels of praise, and just a good overall feel for the game. He feels head and shoulders above many of his fellow rookies, and you guys clearly agree. So yeah, Mag is clearly the favorite, but Muse and Pelican also did pretty good. Muse is another high potential tank who is being put into a fantastic situation this year. Most would argue that Mag is a bit superior skill-wise, but Muse is not far behind, and to be completely honest, he might have more opportunities to prove himself. And the same applies for Pelican, but even more so. Atlanta are considered by most to be a mid-tier NA team, so he can probably hard carry a lot more than a lot of the other rookies. Somebody who left a comment with their vote for Pelican explains this mindset perfectly. Even if Mag is a great player, people like Decay plus some of his other teammates are going to get a lot of the resources and the focus. In Muse, he's kind of in a similar situation because he is working with a lot of star players himself. Pelican though, he mostly just has to compete with Kai and Edison, so his chances could be a lot better. Some of the other standouts as we go down the list with at least 10 votes are Guangboon, Gaga, Valentine, and Assassin, and all of them are pretty understandable because they're all cracked players in their own right. Question 6. Who will be the most improved player? All I gotta say for this is look at the turnout for OG. I am impressed to see that there's still so much faith in him. Even after all of this time of being mediocre, people still think he can make a comeback. I've said it multiple times since the move happened, but if there's one team who could probably make a turnaround possible for him, it's the Mayhem. Kuki is such a great coach. I mean, look at the progress he made with BQB. You have to imagine he's at least partially responsible for his incredible improvement and growth. If BQB can do it, why not OG? He was incredible in his prime, and if he proves to be a good fit on Florida, we might see him get back to that level. I saw one response say he'll be the Sato of Season 4. Then a few others said the sheer talent of Florida and the full Korean environment is going to benefit OG a lot. Many of you seem to believe that the OG comeback story is realistic. It would be pretty cool to see him get back on the right track. The last few years have been not so kind to him. The other person to get a significant number of votes was Glister, and this one's pretty self-explanatory. Everybody basically said the same thing, probably all things you've heard before. Glister was great last year, but he's going to transform into a true superstar since he'll have way better resources and more opportunities to prove himself. It makes a lot of sense. He already has elite mechanics and top-tier counter-sniping abilities, and now he has better teammates and more space to do his thing. Going down the list, I feel like all of the other top picks are pretty good. If the Justice are successful, Bane Closer might be pretty improved. And now that Ursa's on the Dragons, he might get utilized correctly. And what about Shockwave? He's going from a terrible Vancouver team to Philly, and he basically is in the same situation as Glister in a way. And how about Leave? He's playing for a far better Chengdu team. You guys really hit it out of the park with this question. All of these answers feel really realistic. Next up, we have the most improved team, and the results are exactly what you'd expect. The Justice won out pretty easily, getting about 33% of the votes. I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of the general fan base has high expectations for this group, and they're commonly seen as a top 5 or better team by a ton of fans, and that would be a huge improvement compared to how they did last year. To go from 19th place in the regular season standings to a top record in the league is a massive jump. So long as Mag plays up to expectations and the support line holds their own, they should be pretty solid. The other top percentages aren't too shocking either. In second place, we have the Boston Uprising. Much like the Justice, they have nowhere to go but up. But this quite literally applies to the Uprising since they're coming off a last place finish. It would make a lot of sense for them to pull this off. They've improved a ton and could be a solid middle of the pack team if everything goes their way. But they're also a bit risky simply because they have so many new players and they're trying so hard to change, so it might be a struggle at times to get some wins. In third place, we had the Dallas Fuel, which is another good guess. The only reason they were relevant in Season 3 was because of Decay, essentially. It was a one-man show for most of the time that they had any sort of relevance in the league. The new roster they've assembled is really stacked on paper and could definitely be a threat if they get into the right rhythm. The other decently high number at 8% belongs to the Chengdu Hunters. These guys added some nice Chinese talent and made changes at their coaching staff. On paper, they should be able to compete outside of Wrecking Ball metas now, which is always a nice step in the right direction. Chengdu should be a much more stable team now compared to last year, where they essentially got most of their wins in 1 month of time. If they could push towards a top spot in APAC, I could totally see them winning the Most Improved award. Some of the other notable teams who got a fair number of votes, if you're wondering, are the Gladiators and Defiant. Next up was who is going to win Coach of the Year, and it would seem that you guys actually disagree with my take on voter and popularity fatigue, as the majority of you went with Krusty. In all fairness, the award only became a thing last year, I believe, so technically he has not won it before, and if the Shock post a solid year for a third year in a row with him, that would be a pretty safe bet. The next most popular coach was Supreme of the Washington Justice. Again, we're talking about another well-respected guy, and if the Justice transform into a contender like how Shanghai did the year before, then it's totally possible he wins it. All the other top guys are kind of in the same high status boat, if you will. Rush got 9% of the votes, 9K got 8%, Kooky got 6%, KDG got 6%, Lori and Moon got 4%, and of course, because many of you are high on the Gladiators, you believe D-Pay has a shot of winning it as well, as he received 7% of the votes. Overall, there's a solid mix for this award. It provided the most balanced results out of any other question for sure. Now we get to the juicy one. We saved the best question for last. Who or what will be the biggest surprise of the season? This question is a ton of fun because there's basically no restrictions, and I really did enjoy reading the responses. Let's start with some of the popular ones, then we'll go over some of my personal favorites. So sitting at the top was unfortunately the Dallas Fuel. There were 38 total times where they were mentioned, and this is combining both negative and positive predictions. Unfortunately for my Dallas fans watching though, most of the responses were negative. But you guys are used to this by now. Dallas Doubters, they're kind of just a staple of the community at this point. There were quite a few people saying they're either going to crumble or just not live up to the hype. And we have some firm believers that the curse cannot be lifted. Some even went as far as saying they'll be a middle of the pack team. What do you think about this, Dallas fans? Does this frustrate you? Or do you think it's reasonable for these people to feel this way? While I personally think Dallas will be decent this year, you can never rule out the possibility of them flopping because it's kind of a tradition at this point. They're a cursed franchise. But don't worry, Dallas fans, there were some believers as well. The number of doubters was far greater, but a few people seem to think they'll finally get out of the cycle of misery, with one person even claiming they'll reach the Final Four. Another is predicting that the meta lines up in their favor around playoff time with like a Hackfist meta or something. As usual, there's a divide between how people feel about Dallas. Even after all of the stunts they pulled off during the offseason, the doubters still have an overwhelming presence. It's going to be very interesting to see if they're right again or not. Another popular pick was the London Spitfire. Many of you seem to think the community is sleeping on them. There were so many comments on this. I mean, like, it was crazy. A good bunch of the believers are high on their British Hurricane core. One person even sees them having top 10 upside. Is the general community sleeping on London? Do you think they could challenge some of the mid or borderline high tier teams in North America? Let me know what you think in the comments section. Another popular answer revolved around the Valiant. A handful of you are optimistic that they're going to win some games this year. Given their extremely low expectations, that quite easily could end up being a surprise in itself, right? That they end up winning and maybe make some teams earn their wins against them. Oh, and as a side note, I found it really funny that a bunch of you all had the same idea of Seoul or Chengdu losing to them. It goes to show how much of a meme those two have become. Chengdu have their whole Chengdu zone thing, and Seoul had some of the craziest highs and lows we've ever seen last year. I know things have changed over the offseason, but it would be so funny if these people were right. That in itself makes the APAC region so interesting though, you know? Who's going to be the first team to lose to the Valiant, if anybody at all? That'll be a fun little side bet to keep track of. The final popular answer I wanted to get to before getting into some of the fun ones is the Shock choking. I saw so many people say they'll implode, or they're going to disappoint in the playoff due to the meta, or they aren't going to make the finals, or they just generally won't make the three-peat happen. I wonder how many of you out there gave this answer genuinely thinking they won't pull it off, in comparison to those who just want to see someone different win this year. Last year's community prediction saw much of the same occur, where there was this small group of Shock doubters. Given the state of the league, maybe this prediction could come true. There's a few teams out there who really could give them a run for their money. Also, consistently staying at the top is not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot out of you, and I'm willing to bet that a lot of those guys who have been there since season 1 or 2 are starting to feel a little tired. Could that mean their demise is near? It's only a matter of time until we find out. Now for a few quick responses that I thought were pretty good. For one, shout out to the person who said the biggest surprise would be the improvements to the broadcast quality. This is the type of prediction we all hope comes true. We've heard that the league has been working hard on some new graphics and stuff, and the new clip feature is going to be pretty cool as well, you'd have to imagine. And hopefully we just get a nice step up compared to last year. I think that's what we all want. Some better production quality could help really spice things up while everybody's still playing from home. Another one that caught my interest was the idea of the Seoul Dynasty being consistent. Now that would be a surprise. Last year it got really bad, and they essentially have the same core as then, but with a few different pieces. Not only that, but we're talking about overcoming years of this inconsistency curse. This team has been inconsistent since the very beginning. In Season 1, they go 22-18. Season 2, 15-13. And in Season 3, they finished at 12-12. No matter what this team looks like, no matter what the year is, they just feel like they're bound to have an up and down trajectory. It feels so unlikely that they finally overcome this. If Seoul end up being consistent, I'll be very impressed by those of you who believe in them that much. Alright, but how about one more? I read a prediction which stated that Bebe and Closer will be a top 5 support duo in the league. I've seen takes about Closer and Bebe being better than expected, but I have not seen many who have been bold enough to say they'll be top tier. It's one thing to say they'll be better than most people think, but to one-up that statement and say they'll be one of the best, now that is a prediction I can get behind. There are some really nasty looking support lines on paper this year. Consistently playing above that level is going to be tough. Is this prediction likely to come true? If I was a betting man, I would say probably not, but it's certainly a possibility. They'll have access to some of the best coaching in the league. Not only that, but their team is bound to be pretty competitive unless they totally flop. That means Closer and Bebe will have many opportunities to prove themselves in big games. Chances to be clutch and show consistent gameplay is practically in the palms of their hands. It seems a little far-fetched that they'll play up to this particular prediction, but you never know. Crazier things have happened. And with that said, that is going to wrap up the community predictions. The video last year was so well received that I knew I had to bring it back this year, and you guys did not disappoint. The support and participation was unreal. Nearly 500 of you helped make this possible, so thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's content and you'd like to see more of these types of community videos in the future, be sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comment section. And don't forget to check out DraftBuff through the links in the description as well. And as always, thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.